Just write like you talk. It's easy. I've actually caught myself saying this to clients and colleagues time and time and time again. And it was only recently that I realized that's not the only way, and maybe not even the best way, of bringing in a more conversational tone into your content. In this episode, I'm going to share why being conversational matters in your content and in your copy, and we'll touch on where that fine line is between being approachable and being unprofessional. And of course, I'm going to give you tips and actionables on how to really get started in being more conversational yourself. Welcome to Content with Character, the weekly podcast that'll give you the momentum you need to create content with more ease, clarity, and laughter. I'm your host, content copywriter Emily Aborn, and I'm all about unconventional marketing approaches. I believe in your big ideas, and I'm excited to help you share them in a way that's distinctly you. Have you ever noticed how some blogs, podcasts, emails, social media posts, they're seemingly created just for you? It's like you're either in the room with them, or if it's a conversation between two people, you're like a little fly on the wall listening in on their chat. Or they're talking directly to you, and it is actually just the two of you. Creating content in a conversational way, either on our websites or elsewhere in our business, is a wonderful thing. It feels very personal and relatable. It's not overly formal or robotic, and it's refreshing. It uses everyday language. It mirrors how people actually talk to one another. It's not like your English lit essay on the parallels between the heroines of Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. It is more natural. We've been talking a lot about voice and personality and legacy and our unique difference. And today I want to discuss something that I think will forever set you apart from everyone else. Something that will set you apart from AI. Something that will help you to be less copycatable. And in the meantime, it will also create connection, engagement, and approachability. It can even help build on that know, like, and trust that we talked about back in February. And as you probably already guessed by now, that thing is being conversational in your written copy and also your verbal and audio content. So what does that even mean to be conversational? Let's start by defining it. It is a bit of the way that I talk to you here on this podcast. Like, I'm just Emily and we're having a little chit chat, just the two of us. And it really is a bit more of a natural, engaging, approachable form of communication. Specifically when being conversational with written copy, you'll find that it often even mimics real life speech. So you might read something, and as you're reading it, you can actually even hear the writer's voice in your head reading it. The goal is that it's informal, but it's also intentional. So it really makes the reader or listener feel like they're part of the dialogue rather than being lectured or sold to. And what we're going to get into today is how that doesn't actually mean that it's just sloppy or writing how you talk. But it is, to be clear, three key things. Not overly formal or robotic. It does use conversational speech, does use everyday language. We are going to be using some contractions, so brace yourself, grammar nerds. And it is also a rhythm that will mirror how people talk. So even in your writing, there are little ways you can do that. It also encourages interaction, whether that be through questions or humor or just a more friendly tone. It feels like a conversation, and therefore people want to engage in it like a conversation. See how that works? So I'm going to give you a really tangible example. If I wanted to formally talk about my copywriting services, I might say, my copywriting services are designed to provide optimal efficiency and cost-effective solutions for your business. It's like, great. Now, if I wanted to take that in a more conversational approach, I might say, hey, I'm going to write you some seriously amazing copy that sounds like you, brings more of your favorite people into your business, and also won't break the bank. So you can just see how the two are very, very different. Let's do some myth busting, some of which I'm guilty of mythically saying and using myself. First up, the myth of just write like you talk. I think I've said that so many times, but I realized it's actually not that simple, and it's not as easy as it sounds. It's a little bit harder than just that in most cases, because in most cases, when you're talking, just sort of like free form, shooting the breeze, whatever, you ramble. You ramble about the cabin. Even on this podcast, I don't entirely just talk like I talk because I have an outline. So I definitely am guilty of going off on side quests, as my friend Alicia calls them, and tangents. But while I'm being conversational, I'm also not just hitting record and like babbling on and going for it. Like I might talk to my husband later when he asks how my day was. Conversational does not mean sloppy. It doesn't mean unplanned. It doesn't mean unintentional. And in writing, it also is not lazy writing. However, you may bend the rules a little bit so that words read how you actually speak. So for example, I say the word kinda instead of kind of in certain instances when I'm being a little bit sillier, like you kinda are. So I might actually write it like that. Kinda, a. But for the most part, I try to make sure that even when I am being conversational in my writing, I'm still being intentional. I definitely have fun with grammar. And I also know where to put a comma when it's called for. Of course, there are some instances where I'm still able to be conversational, but I'm not going to play around with the English language so much. So for example, if I'm giving a presentation or in my slides for a presentation or a proposal to a client or an email direct to a client, I'm still going to be conversational, but I'm not going to go, writing like I talk exactly. So it is about, in every instance, clarity, connection, engagement. We're not just slopping something together or worst, uploading your voice memos or your transcriptions to Otter AI and then just using whatever it spits out as is. Oh gosh, no. I do use AI tools for transcription, and I will say this, I have never seen an instance yet when I did not have to go back in and conversationalize my own words. So it will take what I said, translate it word for word, and I'm like, I need to make sure that this is intentionally conversational, not just free form talking. So myth number 1 is the just write like you talk. That actually is not the best way to be conversational. Myth number 2, conversational isn't professional. Some of you need to hear this. You and only you can determine the level of professionalism that your business requires and where and how that's going to play out in various spaces. So for example, on my website, I'm still conversational, but I am a little bit more buttoned up and probably professional by most definitions than I am, say, in my weekly emails or in this podcast. When I'm writing somebody else's websites, this is one of the first questions I will start with and have for them. I really love when people I'm writing for embrace that conversational approach. I love when they want to have fun and allow me to take them there. But I also remind them it doesn't have to come at the cost of being professional. We can still have a lot of fun with our copy. We can still be really approachable, and we can still be really professional at the same time. If you don't care about being professional at all, have fun, let loose, and just focus on letting that sweet, sweet conversational personality shine. I envy you in some ways. Ooh, this is making me think that maybe we need to do a future episode about what it means to be professional. Keep that one in the idea bank. Okay. Myth number 3 about being conversational. The myth is if you're casual in one place, then you have to be casual everywhere. Now, this is not true. Different settings, different interactions, different platforms, and different people that you're speaking to are going to have different levels of conversationality. So they're not all as casual conversation. Email versus social media might be a little bit different depending on who's who in your world. Your homepage copy versus a sales page copy. Those are 2 great examples. It's still you, but you're going to probably show up a little bit less casually on your homepage than you would on a sales page, where you're really a sales page is No, that's another story for another day. Okay. And then when you're speaking business to business versus business to consumer, that could also change things for you. What's too casual in one spot might be actually very perfect for another. But I'll say this, even if you're in a meeting with some top executive or you're about to land the biggest hotshot celebrity client of your life, you can still be conversational. You just may not be as casual. So you might have to perhaps alter your tone, your vocabulary choices, your cadence maybe a little bit to be more professionally conversational versus casually conversational. That's all going to vary depending on your unique business. It's like how you dress differently to some weddings versus others, right? Some are like wedding casual and some are formal. This, by the way, is why I absolutely love doing brand messaging guides for people. I'll include a link in the show notes on how you can learn more about those, but it really shows them that here's your personality, here's your voice, here's the tone, and here's the different ways that this plays out in various places, things to avoid, things to include, all kinds of the individual nuance that we actually do kind of need to factor in. So now that you know the what, the why, and the myths of conversational copy, let's get you started in being more conversational, shall we? Your sweet spot is going to be where the copy is and content is conversational, and it also connects with whoever you're speaking to. So as you may have guessed by now, you do need to know a little something about the person you're speaking to on the other side. Not just their age, not just their location, demographics, all that jazz, but also how they talk, how they think, what their expectations of working with you are, what they're looking to accomplish, what they're challenged by and struggling with. You have to know the person on the other side, because part of being conversational is actually using their words, their lingo, not a bunch of industry jargon or complex language that they can't understand. That's when we really, I think, shut down some of the connection that we could be making. It is about saying things how you say them and not being afraid to let your personality out to play. Let your personality connect with their personality by being yourself. So I wanted to give you some really tangible things, some do's and also some don'ts. And I have 7 tangible pointers for you and then 3 little magical tips. So the 7 pointers, number 1 is do use contractions like I've, it's, I'll versus I have, it is, I will. It sounds more natural. It sounds a little bit less like you're the Queen of England and more just like an everyday citizen. And it reads more conversational to the eye when people are reading copy. Tip number 2 is to use rhythm and pacing that mimics natural speech. If you get stuck, try reading your sentence or your paragraph out loud and see where you would naturally pause or take a breath, etc. And then that can guide you in like, do I need a comma? Do I need a semicolon? Like, how can I make this read? How can I make this mimic natural speech in my writing? Tip number 3, do occasionally use some of those punchy, short, or like boom sort of sentences, right? They can help the point come across, and they also help to slow people down. So when I really want to emphasize something and I want to have more fun, let's say, than like caps or italics, I'll break it up with periods between every word. Could not be more cute, or could not be more excited. See you Saturday. Now, what I'm trying to do with that is to really give some weight to that sentence and also to mimic the way that if I were to say it to them in person, it would have like this intonation in my voice, right? So it's just using things like that, using tools like that. And using short, punchy, boom sort of sentences, they can really help to mimic the way that you speak. On the same vein, I would say to avoid too long, meandering, rambling thoughts and sentences that lose people. Whether you are speaking or whether you are writing, droning on and on, that's not conversational. That equals a boring college lecture, i.e. my statistics class. So remember that. You kind of want to break up. If you are going to do long sentences and meandering thoughts, just make sure you're breaking it up in a way where it is still conversational and you're not losing people. Tip number 5, do inject your personality, slang, emojis, your sense of humor. You don't have to overdo it, but don't hesitate. I think that is like some of the most fun that we can have in creating content. So make sure you are injecting your personality. Again, don't go overboard. Do ensure that you are intentional, clear, and you have actually read it over for typos. Typos. I am so guilty of typos, but they are not conversational. they can actually bump somebody out of conversationality because suddenly it becomes glaringly obvious that I'm actually reading something. So when I spot a typo, like the first thing I notice is like, oh, I'm reading a book and this is an author, this is a writer. And I'm bumped out of the story and now I'm sort of like on the quest for typos. So do remember to check your work. Obviously, you will never catch every single typo. You will send emails out with typos in them. Do not stress. Do not worry. One typo is not going to sink your conversational boat. But whenever possible, try to avoid typos because they do bump people out of that conversational flow. Number 7, don't think that being conversational means using a bunch of filler words. On my podcast, I've listened back and I say the word so often. It drives me so mad. I also say like, which also drives me bananas. So there we go. There, I just said it. I am working on those. And while I do say them often here on my podcast, there is no way that I'm going to keep them in every single thing that I say in my copy. Same with the word just. Like there are all kinds of filler words we use that we might say while we're speaking, but I wouldn't recommend including them in your writing. Which, going back to the beginning, it is not just as simple as writing like you speak. And I will say that filler words, if you use too many of them, just and so and but and or, there's lots of them. And at the beginning of lots of sentences, just too many of them overall, they can actually end up weakening your message. Be cognizant of them in your speaking and your writing and use them to your advantage when you want to amp up the conversationality and turn them down sometimes when it's like just a distraction or just a filler word. I think that should be another podcast actually, is like the filler words or words we can just eliminate or try to eliminate. Okay, another topic for another day. Let's get on to those magical tips I promised you. So I'm just going to give you 3 tips on like if you are excited and you want to start being more conversational, you can actually use these to kind of refine the style a little bit. So number 1, read your copy aloud after writing it. I already kind of touched on this one, but check and see, does it sound natural? I would say listen back to your podcast and listen to yourself speak. If you have a podcast, even if it is scripted, you still want it to sound natural to how you speak. And if not, it is perhaps in need of a little tweaking to ensure that it stays conversational, if that is your intention. Magical tip number 2, you can also have somebody else read it and see if it sounds like you and see if it's conversational. One of the huge things I do, I edit for somebody on an ongoing basis, and most of what I edit is just making things contractions. So she will tend to use a lot of like, I have, I will, you can. Well, you can is not an example, but you get the idea. And I will just kind of go back through and clean up, take out filler words and clean up all of those things, making them contractions. Just makes it a little bit easier to read. So you can always have somebody else read it and see if it sounds like you and give you feedback on it. And tip number 3, just remember, this is an experiment. This is a work in progress. So do experiment. Try loads of warmth. Try loads of authority. Try different things until you find what feels really, really good and natural and conversational for you. And then pay attention to feedback and responses and engagement. See what creates engagement. See what sparks interest naturally. You know what? I should have told you I just had 10 tips instead of being like, here's 3 magical ones and here's 7 normal. Anyway, you're getting conversational lifetime. I hope that made you laugh. So again, pay attention to feedback and responses, see what creates engagement and sparks interest. And if you are ready for your marketing microdose, here is my challenge, my invitation for you. Try adjusting a piece of content that you've already written. And what I want you to do is make it be more conversational. See how it changes and then repost it, resend it out to your list. Never hesitate to send it my way. I'm happy to look it over. You can always find me in all of the places I have in the show notes. And of course, if it's like a 10-page dissertation, I will not be just looking it over without some sort of compensation. Anyway, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. On that note, I will chat with you next week. We're going to get into creating content that is actionable and educational and also engaging, but also really, really easy. I'll chat with you then. thanks for listening to this week's episode of Content with Character. If you loved the episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, and share it with someone else you know it could help. For more content and visibility tips, visit my blog at emilyaborn.com, and be sure to connect with me on Instagram at emilyaborn. I'd love to hear how this inspired you to take action.